Way back in the 9th century, deep in the salt marshes of what we now call southern Iraq, one of history's most dramatic and brutal slave revolts just exploded. For 14 years, an army of enslaved people, known as the Zanj, went toe-to-toe with the mighty Abbasid Caliphate, one of the world's great superpowers at the time. It's an incredible story of resistance, of shocking violence, and it's a war that, honestly, is too often forgotten. So, let's get into it.
Now, to really get a feel for this thing, we're not going to start at the beginning. No, we're jumping right into the thick of it, into one of the very first battles. Just try to picture it, a professional army marching into this swampy, confusing maze of canals, totally expecting to crush what they thought was just a disorganized mob of rebels. Boy, were they in for a surprise.
So an Imperial force, 4,000 strong, was sent to just squash this rebellion. But the Zanj army they were facing, they were so poorly equipped that one account actually claims they had only 3 sabers in their entire arsenal. 3! And yet, through just sheer ferocity and some seriously clever tactics, they didn't just win, they set the enemy running. This wasn't a fluke, this was a message.
Yeah, that stunning victory, that was just the opening act of what would become a brutal 14-year war. The Zanj would go on to build their own capital city, make their own money, and basically challenge the Abbasid Empire for control of one of its wealthiest regions. So you have to ask, how on earth did it come to this? What could possibly fuel such a massive and, for a time, successful uprising?
To answer that, we've got to rewind a bit and ask, who were the Zanj? And what was their life like before all of this? Well, they were enslaved people, brought mainly from East Africa to Iraq for one single agonizing purpose. You see, wealthy investors from cities like Basra had bought up these huge tracts of what they called dead lands, basically vast salt flats that were totally useless for farming. The Zanj were brought in to do the backbreaking work of scraping off the top layer of salty soil called Natron just to make the land usable. It was grueling, non-stop work under a blazing hot sun. And the scale of this was just immense. We're not talking about small farms here. The Zanj were crammed into these massive labor camps, with anywhere from 500 to 5,000 people in a single group. These were basically industrial-scale operations that ran on human misery. And on top of that brutal labor, their living conditions were just awful. They were given the absolute bare minimum to survive. Just a few handfuls of flour, some semolina, and dates. So you've got this combination of horrific work, being packed together in huge numbers, and near starvation. It was a powder keg, just waiting for a spark. And that spark arrived in the form of a man named Ali bin Muhammad. Now, he claimed to be a descendant of the Prophet's family, and when he arrived in the region in 869, he saw the misery of the Zanj, and he started to organize them. He didn't just promise them freedom, he promised them wealth, he promised them power, and most of all, he promised them revenge. He forged all that despair into a disciplined and fanatical fighting force. The real key to their early success was how they fought. See, the Abbasid army was this big, conventional force, used to fighting on open battlefields, but the Zanj turned the land itself into a weapon. The thick reeds, the shallow water, the endless canals of southern Iraq, it was a nightmare for a big army, but it was absolutely perfect for guerrilla warfare.
Their tactics were brilliant, and they were brutally effective. They launched these surprise attacks from small boats, hitting fast and then just melting back into the marshes before the Empire's troops could even figure out what was happening. And with every victory, they captured more weapons, more boats, and more supplies, slowly turning themselves from this ragtag group into a well-armed rebel army that knew the terrain better than anyone.
But let's be very clear, this was not a clean fight. The Zanj used terror as a weapon. Captured soldiers were often executed on the spot, their severed heads put on pikes or even sent back to the enemy. This was psychological warfare, pure and simple, designed to just shatter the morale of the Imperial army.
So for 2 years, the Zanj just got stronger and stronger. They raided towns, they defeated Abbasid patrols, and they were building up their power base. And it all culminated in 871 with an incredibly audacious goal: capturing Basra, one of the empire's richest and most important port cities. This move finally forced the Caliphate to realize that the Zanj weren't just a nuisance, they were an existential threat.
The siege of Basra was a masterclass in strategy, both military and psychological. When a lunar eclipse happened, Ali bin Muhammad declared it was a sign from God that they were going to win.
He united his troops with some local Bedouin tribes and, on September 7th, launched this perfectly coordinated three-pronged assault that just completely overwhelmed the city's defenders.
And what came next was absolutely horrific. The Zanj stormed through the streets, killing, looting, and burning everything in sight. The great cathedral mosque was torched, and the people of the city were shown zero mercy. It was an act of total war, really, a violent explosion of revenge for years of suffering.
Now, while historical numbers can sometimes be exaggerated, one writer from the time, al-Mazudi, put the death toll in Basra at a staggering 300,000 people. Even if the real number was just a fraction of that, the massacre sent a shockwave across the entire empire. The rebellion had reached its most terrifying peak.
The fall of Basra was the absolute turning point. The caliph's brother and top general, al-Muwaffaq, a brilliant military commander, was given full authority to crush this revolt once and for all. He knew he couldn't beat the Zanj at their own game, so he raised a massive new army and, crucially, built a dedicated fleet of boats specifically designed to hunt the rebels down in the canals and cut off their supplies. The game had changed.
What came next wasn't a single battle, but a long, grinding war of attrition. The full military and economic power of the Abbasid Caliphate was now laser-focused on one single goal: the complete and total destruction of the Zanj state. The Abbasid strategy was slow, but it was relentless. Led first by al-Muwaffaq's son and then by the man himself, the Imperial forces cleared the canals one by one, building fortified bases as they went. They systematically choked the life out of the Zanj state, cutting them off from food and reinforcements. The final act was a grueling 2-year siege of the rebel capital, al-Muqtara.
Finally, in August of 883, the Abbasid forces broke through the city's defenses. In that last, desperate battle, Ali bin Muhammad was killed. With their charismatic leader gone, the heart of the rebellion was just torn out. After 14 long years, the war was over.
The cost was, well, it was almost unimaginable. The war lasted for nearly a decade and a half. Some estimates put the total death toll from all the fighting and the sack of Basra at over 500,000 people. The entire economy of southern Iraq was just left in ruins for years to come.
And that brings us to the final, really interesting question. I mean, the Zanj Rebellion was one of the largest and longest slave revolts in all of history. These people built a state, they commanded armies, and they brought a global superpower to its knees. So why isn't their story as famous as, say, Spartacus? It's a powerful reminder that history is just full of these epic struggles that are still waiting to be rediscovered.